The Cathedral of Saints. Peter and Donatus stood magnificent against the clear blue Tuscan sky, its medieval stone facade bathed in the warm glow of a perfect May afternoon in Arezzo. Inside, delicate arrangements of white lilies and baby's breath adorned the end of each wooden pew, their fragrance mingling with the lingering scent of incense from the morning mass. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor, where just moments ago Margherita Ricci had watched her dreams crumble before her eyes. At 22, she had planned every detail of this day since childhood. The handmade lace veil passed down through generations of her family, the precise shade of blush roses in her bouquet, the traditional gold band that would symbolize her entrance into married life. What she hadn't planned for was standing alone at the altar, the murmurs of 200 guests rising behind her like an incoming tide, as the minutes ticked by with no sign of her fiancé, Alessandro. "He's just running late," her father had whispered initially, his weathered hand patting hers reassuringly as they waited at the church entrance. But as 5 minutes stretched to 15, and then to a full half hour, the whispers among the guests grew louder, and the priest's sympathetic glances became increasingly uncomfortable. When her father's phone finally buzzed with a message, Margherita knew from his expression that whatever news it contained would shatter the carefully constructed future she had envisioned. "He's not coming, Tesoro," her father had said, his voice cracking with a mixture of sorrow and rage. "Alessandro has left the country. His mother just called. He took a flight to America this morning." The words had struck her like physical blows, each one stealing her breath until she stood frozen in the antechamber, her mind unable to process the magnitude of this betrayal. Now, as she stood at the altar where vows should have been exchanged, Margherita felt suspended between worlds, no longer a bride, yet dressed in an exquisite gown of ivory silk that suddenly felt like a costume in a cruel play. Her mother had already begun the painful process of informing guests. Her aunt was on the phone, cancelling the reception at Villa Il Palagio, and her 3 bridesmaids huddled nearby, their matching sage-green dresses now seeming inappropriately festive for what had become a scene of public humiliation. Worst of all were the pitying glances from the assembled guests, families she had known all her life, colleagues from the art restoration studio where she worked, Alessandro's relatives who looked as shocked as she felt. In a city like Arezzo, where traditional values still held strong influence and social connections spanned generations, this kind of abandonment wasn't just personally devastating, it was a public spectacle that would be discussed in every cafe and household for months to come. "Margherita, cara," her mother whispered, appearing at her side with reddened eyes and a forced smile. "We should leave now. Your father has pulled the car around to the side entrance to avoid, well, to give us some privacy." The thought of slipping away through a side door, hiding her shame like some guilty secret, sparked an unexpected flare of anger in Margherita's chest, a welcome heat after the cold shock that had numbed her since receiving the news. She straightened her spine, years of ballet training automatically correcting her posture as she prepared to walk back down the aisle alone, head high, despite the tears that threatened to spill onto her cheeks. Just as she gathered her courage to take the first step, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the cathedral swung open with a decisive creak that echoed through the vaulted space, immediately silencing the murmuring congregation. The man who stood in the doorway was not someone Margherita recognized immediately, though something about his commanding presence seemed vaguely familiar. Tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that contrasted with the festive attire of the wedding guests, he surveyed the scene with dark eyes that missed nothing. As he began walking down the aisle with measured steps, recognition rippled through the congregation, heads turning, whispers resuming with new urgency, some guests shrinking back in their seats as if to avoid notice. It wasn't until her father rushed forward, intercepting the newcomer halfway down the aisle with a deferential greeting, that Margherita realized who had entered her ruined wedding. Gualtiero Moretti, owner of most of the commercial real estate in central Arezzo, rumored controller of businesses that extended far beyond legitimate enterprises, and a man whose name was spoken with equal parts respect and fear throughout Tuscany. Whatever business brought Moretti to the cathedral on this day, Margarita had no interest in it. Her personal tragedy was already public enough without adding this unexpected drama. She turned toward her mother, intending to follow the suggestion of leaving discreetly when her father suddenly beckoned her forward. Confusion mingled with the embarrassment and heartbreak already churning inside her, but years of respecting her father's authority propelled her down the steps toward the two men. As she approached, she noted details about Moretti that weren't visible from a distance. The perfect tailoring of his suit, which must have cost more than 3 months of her salary at the restoration studio. The subtle scent of expensive cologne, the way his presence seemed to command the space around him without any visible effort. Most striking were his eyes, dark and intelligent, assessing her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and intrigued. "Signorina Ricci," he said when her father introduced them, his voice deeper than she had expected, and carrying just a hint of the local Aretino accent beneath cultured Italian. "Your reputation in art restoration precedes you. The Piero della Francesca frescoes at San Francesco have benefited greatly from your skill." The compliment, so unexpected in this moment of personal crisis and focused on her professional accomplishments rather than her current humiliation, momentarily stunned Margarita into silence. Before she could formulate a response, Moretti turned to address her father. "Antonio, may I speak with you and your daughter privately? There is a matter of some importance I wish to discuss." Though phrased as a request, something in his tone made it clear that refusal was not an option being offered. Her father nodded immediately, guiding them toward a small side chapel used for private prayer and confession. The whispers among the guests grew to an almost physical presence as the three of them moved away from the main altar. Margarita could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes following their progress, speculation already building about this unexpected development in what had already become the social drama of the season in Arezzo. The side chapel offered little in the way of true privacy, merely a separation from the main body of the cathedral rather than a closed room. But Moretti seemed unconcerned about potential eavesdroppers as he turned to face them. "I'll speak directly," he said, his gaze moving between father and daughter with calm authority. "I've been observing your family for some time, particularly your work, Signorina. When I heard about today's unfortunate events, I saw an opportunity that might benefit us both." Margarita's confusion deepened as Moretti continued, explaining that he had been seeking someone with her specific restoration skills for several valuable art pieces in his private collection. "However," he added, his expression remaining impassive despite the extraordinary nature of what he was about to propose, "what I'm offering extends beyond professional opportunity. Your family's reputation in Arezzo is important, as is your personal dignity. The man who left you today has caused damage that goes beyond emotional hurt. In our community, such public humiliation has lasting consequences." Her father shifted uncomfortably beside her, and Margarita realized with a sinking feeling that Moretti was right. In a traditional city like Arezzo, being abandoned at the altar would mark her in ways that could affect everything from future relationships to business connections. People would whisper for years, speculating about what flaw or secret had caused Alessandro to flee rather than marry her. "I propose a solution," Moretti said, his voice lowering slightly, though his directness remained unwavering. "Marriage, today, now." The words hung in the air between them, so unexpected that Margarita wondered momentarily if shock had affected her hearing. Her father made a choked sound beside her, but Moretti continued before either could interrupt. "To the assembled guests, it would appear that plans changed, but the wedding proceeded. Your family saves face, the celebration continues as planned, and you gain both protection and opportunity through connection to my name and resources. In return, I acquire a wife with the restoration skills my collection requires and the social graces my position occasionally demands." He delivered this extraordinary proposal with the same matter-of-fact tone one might use to suggest a business partnership or property transaction, his expression revealing nothing of his personal motivations beyond the practical benefits he had outlined. The absurdity of the situation struck Margarita with such force that she nearly laughed despite her tears. Here she stood in her wedding gown, having just been abandoned by the man she had planned to spend her life with, listening to a virtual stranger propose marriage as if arranging a business merger. "Signor Moretti," she began, finding her voice despite the emotional turmoil still churning inside her, "while I appreciate your unusual offer, I cannot possibly—" Her father's hand on her arm interrupted her refusal, his fingers tightening in a silent warning that confused her further. Looking at his face, she saw something she had rarely witnessed in her confident, successful father. Fear, mingled with a desperate calculation that made her stomach clench with fresh anxiety. Before she could decipher his expression, the chapel door opened and her mother entered, her tear-stained face a reminder of the public humiliation still awaiting them all. "Antonio, the guests are becoming restless," her mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper as she noticed Moretti. "We should make an announcement," and she stopped abruptly as her husband pulled her aside, speaking rapidly in hushed tones that nevertheless carried enough for Margarita to catch fragments about opportunity and protection and consider the alternatives. Watching her parents' urgent conference, with occasional glances toward Moretti, who stood impassive and apparently untroubled by the chaos he had introduced into their already devastating day, Margarita felt a strange calm descend over her. The emotional whiplash of the past hour, from bride to abandoned woman to whatever this new proposal might make her, had pushed her beyond ordinary reactions into a state where nothing seemed quite real. When her parents turned back to her, their expressions now unified in cautious hope rather than devastation, she understood that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics of this moment. Whatever Gualtiero Moretti represented in Arezzo's social and economic landscape, her parents believed his offer represented salvation rather than further catastrophe. "La sposerò io," Moretti said again, this time addressing the silent question in her mother's eyes, before turning his intense gaze back to Margarita. "I will marry you, today, as planned, though with a different groom. You need not fear for your heart. This arrangement would have practical foundations rather than emotional expectations. But you would be respected, protected, and provided for in ways that far exceed what your previous fiancé could have offered." He paused, and for the first time, something like genuine human consideration flickered across his composed features. "You need not answer immediately. Take 5 minutes to discuss with your parents, but remember that 200 guests await a resolution to this drama, and the longer we delay, the more speculation will grow." With that remarkably pragmatic observation, he stepped outside the chapel, leaving the Ricci family to their desperate conference in the wake of his extraordinary proposal. The Villa Il Palagio glowed with hundreds of candles and strands of delicate fairy lights as dusk settled over the Tuscan hills surrounding Arezzo, creating an atmosphere of enchantment that belied the extraordinary circumstances of the celebration taking place within its ancient stone walls. Margarita moved through the reception in a state of surreal detachment, accepting congratulations from guests whose initial shock had quickly transformed into fascinated approval of her apparent social elevation. The hastily adjusted wedding ceremony had proceeded with remarkable smoothness once the decision was made. Gualtiero had produced the necessary documentation with efficiency that suggested either remarkable foresight or concerning connections within Arezzo's administrative offices, while the priest had accepted the substitution with only minimal hesitation after a private conversation with the groom. Now, watching her new husband navigate the crowd with the confident ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention, Margarita struggled to reconcile the day's events with the future she had envisioned just hours earlier. "You're handling this with remarkable grace," observed her cousin Sophia, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of Prosecco and a concerned expression that cut through the polite facade surrounding them. "Though I'm still trying to understand how you ended up married to Gualtiero Moretti instead of Alessandro. 1 minute, we were all waiting for your runaway groom. The next minute, Arezzo's most powerful man was standing at the altar with you." She handed Margarita one of the glasses, her eyes scanning her cousin's face for signs of distress beneath the composed exterior she had maintained throughout the ceremony. and reception. Margarita took a sip of the sparkling wine, buying herself time to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the business-like nature of the arrangement she had entered into just hours earlier. Before she could speak, however, she felt a presence behind her, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that she was already learning to recognize as her new husband's approach. "Sofia Ricci," Gualtiero said, acknowledging her cousin with a slight nod that somehow managed to be both courteous and dismissive. "I believe your father is looking for you. Something about a toast he wishes to propose." The hint was clear, and Sofia reluctantly excused herself after a final concerned glance at Margarita. Once they were alone, or as alone as one could be in a reception filled with curious observers, Gualtiero turned his attention fully to his new wife. "You've performed admirably," he said quietly, his tone carrying neither warmth nor criticism, merely objective assessment. "The guests are convinced, which was our primary objective for this evening. Your reputation is preserved, and the alliance between our families is established in the public consciousness." He spoke of their marriage as one might discuss a successfully executed business strategy, which Margarita supposed was precisely what it represented to him. "And what happens tomorrow?" she asked, keeping her voice equally low while maintaining the smile expected of a new bride. "When the performance ends and reality begins." The question had been circling in her mind throughout the ceremony and reception. Beyond the immediate solution to her public humiliation, what exactly had she agreed to by accepting this arranged marriage? Gualtiero's dark eyes studied her face for a moment before he responded, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Tomorrow, you move into my home. You begin work on the art collection I mentioned. We establish a routine that appears appropriately conjugal to outside observers, while maintaining private boundaries that allow each of us necessary independence." His answer was as pragmatic as everything else about him, yet something in his precise articulation of their arrangement reassured Margarita. Whatever else Gualtiero Moretti might be, and rumors about his business dealings suggested many possibilities, he appeared to be a man who valued clarity and kept his word. The reception continued around them, guests enjoying the excellent food and wine that had been prepared for a wedding feast that ultimately served a very different union than originally planned. Margarita's parents circulated through the crowd with expressions that had transformed from earlier devastation to cautious optimism, their social standing not just salvaged, but unexpectedly elevated by their daughter's sudden marriage to one of Arezzo's most influential men. Watching them accept congratulations and engage in animated conversation with guests who, hours earlier, had been offering pitying glances, Margarita felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that her family had been spared ongoing humiliation, gratitude for Gualtiero's intervention despite its calculated nature, and an undercurrent of apprehension about the life she had impulsively chosen in a moment of crisis. When the traditional first dance was announced, she turned to find her new husband offering his hand with the same composed confidence he had displayed throughout the day. "I should warn you that I have limited experience with dancing," Gualtiero said, as he led her onto the floor, his hand resting properly at her waist while maintaining a respectful distance between them. This small admission, the first hint of any personal limitation, surprised Margarita almost as much as his unexpected proposal had hours earlier. The orchestra began playing a traditional waltz, and she discovered that his warning had been unnecessary. He moved with the same controlled precision that characterized everything else about him, leading her through the dance with competent, if somewhat mechanical step. "You dance perfectly well for someone with limited experience," she observed, finding her professional assessment voice despite the surreal circumstances. "Your technique suggests formal training at some point, though perhaps without particular enjoyment of the process." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps or reluctant amusement, crossed Gualtiero's typically impassive features. 3 months of lessons from a retired ballet instructor when I was 25, he confirmed, executing a turn with careful attention to proper form. A business associate convinced me that certain social skills were necessary for the position I was establishing in Arezzo. Dancing was on the list, along with wine appreciation and conversational French. This glimpse into his methodical self-improvement, approaching social graces as skills to be acquired rather than pleasures to be enjoyed, offered Margarita her first real insight into the man she had just married. Before she could pursue this thread further, however, the music ended, and they were immediately surrounded by guests eager to dance with either bride or groom, social obligations that separated them for much of the remaining reception. It was nearly midnight when the celebration finally began winding down, guests departing with final congratulations and curious glances toward the newly married couple. Margarita found herself experiencing a growing sense of anxiety as the inevitability of leaving with Gualtiero approached. Not fear exactly, as nothing in his behavior had suggested any threatening intentions, but the natural apprehension of facing an unknown situation with a virtual stranger. Her mother approached as she was gathering her belongings from the bridal suite, bringing not just the overnight bag that had been packed for a very different honeymoon than whatever awaited her now, but also concerned maternal advice. "He seems respectful," her mother offered hesitantly, clearly struggling to find appropriate guidance for this unprecedented situation. "Your father says his business reputation, while sometimes frightening, includes absolute integrity in keeping his word. If he promised you certain considerations in this arrangement, I believe he will honor them." The careful phrasing made it clear that her parents had drawn their own conclusions about the nature of this sudden marriage, assumptions that Margarita neither confirmed nor corrected as she hugged her mother goodbye. Whatever explanation Gualtiero had given her father during their private conversation in the cathedral, it had been convincing enough to transform parental devastation into cautious approval within minutes. Now, as she joined her new husband in the sleek black Maserati waiting at the villa entrance, Margarita wondered exactly what terms had been discussed in those crucial moments while she stood in shocked silence, still processing Alessandro's abandonment. The drive through Arezzo's darkened streets passed in silence, neither of them apparently feeling the need for conversation after hours of public performance and social engagement. Gualtiero's home, when they arrived, defied the ostentatious display of wealth Margarita might have expected from someone of his position. Located in the historic center of Arezzo, the building was a beautifully preserved medieval palazzo whose exterior blended seamlessly with the architectural character of the neighborhood, while subtle security features, discreetly positioned cameras, reinforced doors and windows with what appeared to be specialized glass, hinted at the owner's need for protection. Inside, the space revealed an unexpected aesthetic sensibility, classic Tuscan architectural elements preserved and enhanced rather than replaced, furnishings that emphasized comfort alongside quality, and most surprisingly, walls adorned with an art collection that immediately captured Margarita's professional attention. Renaissance and Baroque works hung alongside carefully selected contemporary pieces, creating a dialogue across centuries that demonstrated genuine appreciation rather than mere acquisition for status. "Your collection is remarkable," she said, after Gualtiero had given her a brief tour of the main floors, ending in a spacious studio that had clearly been prepared for her work. Professional admiration temporarily overcame the awkwardness of their situation as she moved closer to examine a small panel painting that appeared to be from the Sienese school. "Is this a genuine Lorenzetti? The brushwork suggests his technique, but I wasn't aware any of his smaller works were in private hands." Gualtiero approached, standing beside her with a respectful distance that seemed to be his habitual manner. "Attributed to his workshop, though I've always suspected it might be his own hand," he replied, and Margarita heard the first genuine enthusiasm in his voice since they had met. "Your assessment supports that possibility, which is precisely why I sought someone with your expertise. Many pieces in this collection require professional evaluation and some degree of conservation work." The conversation about art, territory where Margarita felt confident despite the day's emotional upheaval, continued as Gualtiero showed her additional pieces throughout the house, his knowledge revealing a collection collector motivated by genuine appreciation rather than investment value alone. This shared interest provided neutral ground where they could interact as professionals rather than strangers bound by a hastily arranged marriage, temporarily easing the tension that had built throughout the evening. Eventually, however, practical matters could no longer be avoided, and Gualtiero led her to the upper floor where private living quarters were located. "Your rooms," he said, opening a door to reveal a beautifully appointed suite that included a bedroom, sitting area, and private bathroom. "My quarters are at the opposite end of the hall. You'll have complete privacy here." The arrangement confirmed what his earlier comments had suggested. This marriage, while legal and public, would maintain private boundaries that respected both their independence. "There are clothes in the wardrobe," Gualtiero continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than apologetic about this evidence of preparation that must have preceded her agreement to the marriage. "I had my assistant purchase items based on the sizes your mother provided. Anything unsuitable can be replaced tomorrow." The casual reference to having arranged such personal details and involving her mother in the process reminded Margarita forcefully of the calculated nature of their arrangement. Whatever emotional whirlwind had carried her through this extraordinary day, Gualtiero Moretti had approached their marriage with the same strategic planning he apparently applied to all aspects of his life. This realization should have felt cold, perhaps even offensive, yet Margarita found herself experiencing an unexpected appreciation for his practical efficiency. After Alessandro's romantic promises that had ultimately proved worthless, there was something almost refreshing about Gualtiero's straightforward approach to their unusual partnership. "Thank you," she said simply, deciding that matching his directness was the most dignified response to this unprecedented situation. "For the arrangements here and for today. Whatever your reasons, you saved my family from public humiliation, and I won't forget that." Atu. The acknowledgement seemed to surprise him slightly, as though gratitude wasn't a response he frequently encountered. For a moment, something almost like uncertainty flickered across his typically composed features before his usual self-possession returned. It was a mutually beneficial solution to an unexpected situation, he replied with characteristic pragmatism. "Rest now. Tomorrow will be soon enough to establish routines and discuss specifics of your work here." Udin, with a slight nod that served as both good night and dismissal, he turned and walked toward his own quarters, leaving Margarita alone with thoughts as tangled and complex as the extraordinary day that had transformed her from abandoned bride to wife of one of Arezzo's most powerful and feared men. Morning light filtered through elegant cream-colored curtains, gradually pulling Margarita from dreams filled with wedding veils and unfamiliar faces. For a blissful moment between sleep and wakefulness, her mind remained unburdened by memory. Then, reality rushed back with disorienting force. This wasn't her childhood bedroom in her parents' home, nor the apartment she had shared with her roommate before moving in with Alessandro. The tasteful luxury surrounding her belonged to Gualtiero Moretti, the man who had become her husband through a series of events so improbable they seemed more like fiction than her actual life. Sitting up slowly, Margarita took stock of her situation with the clear-eyed practicality that had always been her strength, even as emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "One day at a time," she told herself firmly. "Focus on what you can control." The approach had guided her through art school and her professional challenges. Now it would have to sustain her through this unexpected detour in her personal life. The wardrobe, as Gualtiero had mentioned, contained an array of clothing in her size. Simple, elegant pieces that reflected good taste without being ostentatious. Choosing a cornflower blue dress that suited her coloring, Margarita prepared to face her first day as Signora Moretti with as much dignity as she could muster. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, though the kitchen showed signs of recent activity. Fresh coffee in a press pot, still warm, and a note propped against a basket of pastries. "Business requires my attention this morning," Gualtiero's precise handwriting informed her. "Maria will arrive at 10 to discuss household matters. The studio is prepared for your work when you are ready to begin. I will return for lunch at 1. The message was neither warm nor cold, simply informative, establishing the practical framework he had promised, rather than attempting any pretense of traditional honeymoon affection. Maria, when she arrived precisely at at the appointed time turned out to be a formidable woman in her 60s, whose formal manner couldn't quite conceal her intense curiosity about the new Signora Moretti. "I've managed the household for Signor Gualtiero for 12 years, she explained, as she showed Margherita through the practical aspects of the palazzo: kitchen arrangements, laundry procedures, security protocols that seemed excessive for a normal household, but perhaps made sense given Gualtiero's position. Throughout the tour, Maria's conversation revealed tiny fragments of information about the man Margherita had married: his preference for simplicity despite his wealth, his exacting standards in some areas alongside complete indifference to others, his intensely private nature that made yesterday's public wedding all the more remarkable to those who knew him well. "He's never brought a woman to live here," Maria observed with a sidelong glance that evaluated Margherita's reaction. "Business associates and family connections visit, but personal relationships have always been conducted elsewhere." This glimpse into Gualtiero's previous patterns only deepened the mystery of why he had proposed such a public and permanent solution to her situation. Protection for her reputation and access to her professional skills seemed insufficient motivation for a man who could presumably hire any art restorer and who had no obvious connection to her family that would explain his concern for their social standing. These questions circled in Margherita's mind as she finally made her way to the studio where her work would take place, deciding that professional focus would be her best anchor amid the personal uncertainties surrounding her. The space had been prepared with impressive attention to detail: specialized lighting, proper ventilation systems, conservation-grade materials arranged on pristine workbenches, and reference volumes related to the periods and styles represented in Gualtiero's collection. Whatever else might be unclear about their arrangement, his commitment to providing appropriate conditions for her professional work was evident in every aspect of the studio's setup. Margherita had just begun examining the first piece scheduled for conservation, a small but exquisite Madonna and Child showing typical condition issues for its period, when she heard Gualtiero's return shortly after 1 o'clock. Setting aside her magnifying glass and preliminary notes, she made her way to the dining room, where Maria was setting out lunch. Unsure what expectations her new husband might have regarding shared meals and daily routines, she found him reviewing documents at the table, his business attire and serious expression suggesting a morning spent in much different activities than her own careful examination of centuries-old brushwork. He looked up at her approach, setting aside his papers with a nod that acknowledged her presence without particular warmth or coldness, the same neutral courtesy he had displayed since their unusual arrangement began. "I trust you found everything satisfactory in the studio?" he asked. His question focused on professional matters rather than personal adjustment to her new circumstances. "The setup is excellent," Margherita confirmed as she took the seat Maria indicated, directly to Gualtiero's right at the rectangular table that could easily have accommodated 12. "Whoever helped you prepare it understands conservation requirements at a professional level." The observation was genuine. The studio represented a significant investment beyond what most private collectors would consider, suggesting either exceptional commitment to proper art preservation or access to specialized knowledge through his various business connections. Gualtiero inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement of the compliment. Professor Bianchi from the Restoration Department at the university provided consultation on the technical requirements. The actual implementation was handled by a construction team that has worked on several museum installations in Florence. The explanation was delivered with his typical precision, neither boastful about the resources involved nor apologetic for the evident expense. Their conversation throughout lunch maintained this same pattern, focused primarily on practical matters related to her work, the household arrangements, and occasional necessary public appearances they would need to make as a couple to maintain the illusion of a normal marriage. Gualtiero spoke with the same direct efficiency that characterized everything she had observed about him so far, outlining expectations and schedules with the clarity of someone accustomed to managing complex operations. Yet beneath this businesslike exterior, Margarita occasionally glimpsed something else, a flicker of genuine interest when she described the conservation challenges of a particular painting, a momentary softening around his eyes when Maria brought in a dessert he apparently particularly enjoyed, brief instances that hinted at a human being beneath the carefully controlled facade he presented to the world. "There will be a business dinner here tomorrow evening," Gualtiero informed her as their meal concluded. "6 guests, associates from Rome and their wives. Your presence would be helpful." Though phrased almost as a request, Margarita understood this was part of the role she had agreed to when accepting his proposal. The social graces he had mentioned as one of her contributions to their arrangement. "Of course," she agreed, mentally reviewing the appropriate clothing among her new wardrobe. "Should I know anything specific about these associates before meeting them?" The question seemed to surprise him slightly, perhaps unaccustomed to someone seeking strategic information rather than simply following instructions. After a brief pause, he provided concise backgrounds on each expected guest, their business connections, personal interests, and potential conversational topics to either pursue or avoid. The briefing was delivered with the same efficiency he might use for a business intelligence report, yet Margarita found it both useful and oddly considerate, a recognition that he was asking her to perform in a social arena where information represented power and preparation. The remainder of the day established what would apparently become their routine, separate professional activities, minimal but cordial interaction when their paths crossed, and clearly defined boundaries that maintained personal space while presenting an appropriate public image. Dinner was served at 8, a quiet affair where conversation remained largely focused on her initial assessment of the artwork she had begun examining and his carefully edited account of business matters that had occupied his day. Margarita found herself studying her new husband with the same careful attention she typically reserved for damaged paintings, trying to discern the underlying reality beneath the composed surface he presented to the world. At 39, Gualtiero Moretti carried his authority with the ease of someone who had held power for many years, yet occasional comments suggested his current position represented significant elevation from more humble beginnings. His knowledge of art revealed genuine passion alongside investment acumen, while his interactions with household staff displayed the respect of someone who understood service from personal experience rather than inherited privilege. These observations occupied Margarita's thoughts as she prepared for bed that evening, her mind still struggling to reconcile the public reputation of the man she had married with the private individual gradually being revealed through daily interaction. Arezzo's whispers painted Gualtiero Moretti as someone to be feared, a man whose business interests extended into territories best left unexamined, whose power could crush obstacles with ruthless efficiency, whose favor meant protection, and whose displeasure meant ruin. Yet in the 24 hours since their extraordinary wedding, Margarita had encountered none of the threatening presence such rumors would suggest, finding instead a man of precise habits and careful boundaries who had, for reasons still unclear, offered a solution to her public humiliation that protected both her dignity and her future prospects at considerable cost to his own private nature. The business dinner the following evening provided Margarita's first opportunity to observe Gualtiero in his professional element, a context where his public reputation had been established and where their unusual marriage would face its first significant scrutiny from those who knew him before this unexpected development. She prepared carefully, selecting an elegant but modest emerald dress from her new wardrobe and arranging her chestnut hair in a simple style that emphasized its natural waves. Maria had overseen the dining room preparation with military precision, transforming the space with fine linens, silver, and arrangements of white flowers whose subtle fragrance wouldn't interfere with the appreciation appreciation of the excellent wines already breathing in crystal decanters. When Gualtiero joined her in the formal sitting room where they would receive their guests, Margarita noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor, a heightened alertness beneath his usual composed exterior that suggested these particular associates held significance beyond ordinary business relationship. "You look appropriate," he observed upon seeing her, the comment delivered as objective assessment rather than personal compliment. These men respect traditional presentations of femininity while expecting intelligence in conversation. Their wives will be evaluating you as both an unexpected addition to our circle and a potential competitive factor in social dynamics. The briefing continued his pattern of providing practical information rather than emotional reassurance, yet Margarita found herself appreciating this direct approach more than empty flattery or vague encouragement might have offered. "I assume they'll also be curious about how you came to marry someone they've known as determinedly unmarried," she observed, the slight lift of her eyebrow inviting clarification about how they should present their sudden union to people familiar with Gualtiero's previous patterns. Something almost like appreciation flickered in his expression, recognition of her practical focus on the strategic aspects of their situation rather than emotional complications. "The official narrative is simple," he replied, adjusting his already perfect cuffs in what Margarita was beginning to recognize as a habitual gesture when organizing his thoughts. "We met through your restoration work on a piece I acquired 6 months ago. A private relationship developed, kept discreet until your previous engagement ended unexpectedly. Taking advantage of already arranged wedding plans was a practical decision rather than an impulsive one." The fabricated timeline neatly explained both the sudden nature of their marriage and its public execution in a way that would satisfy curiosity without inviting deeper questioning. Before Margarita could inquire further about potential complications in this narrative, the doorbell announced their first guest's arrival, and she watched as Gualtiero visibly shifted into his public persona, shoulders squaring almost imperceptibly, expression becoming more controlled while simultaneously more socially engaging, voice modulating to a deeper register that subtly emphasized his authority. What followed was a masterclass in social power dynamics, with Margarita observing how Gualtiero controlled the evening through seemingly effortless hospitality that nevertheless maintained clear hierarchies among his guests. The men, 2 Romans who apparently oversaw business interests connected to Gualtiero's operations, and their Aretino subordinate, who seemed particularly anxious to impress his superiors, deferred to her husband with a respect that bordered on deference despite their own evident wealth and status. Their wives, elegantly dressed and perfectly groomed, evaluated Margarita with the practiced subtlety of women accustomed to navigating social waters where direct questions would be considered vulgar, but information was nonetheless essential currency. Throughout dinner, she maintained the delicate balance Gualtiero had outlined, demonstrating appropriate cultural knowledge without overshadowing the men's conversation, showing warm interest in the women's lives without forming alliances that might later prove complicated, and presenting their hasty marriage as a romantic culmination of a discreetly conducted relationship rather than the practical arrangement it actually was. "Your wife is a welcome addition to our circle, Moretti," commented Signor Falcone, the elder of the Roman visitors, as brandy was served following Maria's exceptional dinner. "Beautiful, intelligent, and with a proper appreciation for traditional values, qualities increasingly rare in modern women." The assessment, delivered as generous compliment though it made Margarita's feminist sensibilities bristle internally, seemed to please Gualtiero, who inclined his head in acknowledgement while his hand moved to rest lightly on her shoulder, the first public display of possessive affection he had shown since their wedding ceremony. "Margarita brings many valuable qualities to our partnership," he agreed, his tone suggesting layers of meaning beyond the obvious. "Her artistic expertise has already proven beneficial to my collection, while her social grace, as you've observed tonight, complements my own more direct approach to relationships." The slight self-deprecation, acknowledging his reputation for bluntness in business matters, elicited appreciative chuckles from the men, while their wives exchanged glances that Margarita interpreted as reassessment of her position in their social hierarchy. When the evening finally concluded and their guests departed with warm expressions of inclusion that contrasted with their initial cautious evaluation, Margarita felt the curious mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion that typically followed complex social performances. Returning to the sitting room where Gualtiero remained, reviewing something on his phone, she allowed herself to sink into an armchair with less perfect posture than she had maintained throughout the evening. "Did I perform adequately to your expectations?" she asked, the directness of her question matching his own typical communication style. Gualtiero looked up, setting his phone aside with a deliberateness that suggested transitioning from one type of attention to another. "More than adequately," he replied after a moment's consideration. "You navigated difficult social terrain with remarkable skill for someone thrust into these waters without preparation. Falcone's approval in particular represents significant advantage for certain business matters currently under negotiation." The acknowledgement, delivered as objective assessment rather than emotional gratitude, nevertheless represented the most direct appreciation he had expressed since their arrangement began. Margarita found herself unexpectedly pleased by this recognition of her contribution, despite her intellectual awareness that their marriage remained a practical partnership rather than emotional connection. "Your world is more complex than I anticipated," she observed, choosing her words carefully as she processed impressions from the evening. The power dynamics, the unspoken hierarchies, the careful distinction between public presentation and private reality, it's like a Renaissance court with modern trappings. The analogy, drawn from her art historical background, seemed to amuse Gualtiero slightly, one corner of his mouth lifting in what might almost have been a genuine smile rather than social performance. "An apt comparison," he acknowledged, relaxing marginally into his own chair, though his posture remained more formal than her own. "Business empires, like historical courts, function through complex systems of allegiance, favor, and carefully balanced power. Tonight's dinner party represented diplomatic engagement as significant as any formal contract signing." This glimpse into his strategic thinking, the layered purposes beneath seemingly straightforward social interaction, offered Margarita further insight into the man she had married. Whatever public whispers might suggest about Gualtiero Moretti's methods or connections, his approach to power appeared more nuanced than mere intimidation or financial leverage, incorporating psychological understanding and social intelligence alongside whatever more direct methods might occasionally prove necessary in his business dealings. This realization neither entirely comforted nor alarmed her, instead adding another dimension to the complex portrait gradually emerging from behind his carefully maintained public persona. The following weeks established rhythms within their unusual arrangement, Margarita immersing herself in the restoration work that provided genuine professional satisfaction while gradually adjusting to her role as Signora Moretti in Arezzo's social landscape. Gualtiero maintaining his business operations with the same controlled efficiency that characterized all his activities, while integrating her presence into his previously solitary existence with minimal disruption to either of their independent routines. They developed comfortable patterns of interaction, shared breakfasts where practical matters were discussed, occasional dinners when his schedule permitted, social events where they presented convincing performance of traditional marriage while maintaining private boundaries upon returning home. Throughout this careful dance of public presentation and private reality, Margarita found herself increasingly curious about the man behind the composed exterior, glimpsing occasional hints of depth and complexity that contradicted the simplified reputation that had preceded their unexpected connection. One such revelation occurred nearly a month after their wedding, when Margarita returned from a professional consultation at a small church outside Arezzo to find unexpected sounds emanating from a room Gualtiero had identified as a private study during her initial tour of the palazzo. The door stood slightly ajar, allowing the unmistakable notes of a piano to escape into the hallway. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, played with technical precision precision and unexpected emotional sensitivity. Drawn by curiosity about this previously undisclosed talent, Margarita moved quietly toward the opening, careful not to disturb the player who seemed unaware of her return. Through the narrow gap, she could see Gualtiero seated at a beautiful antique piano, his customary business attire replaced by more casual clothing, his typically controlled expression transformed by complete absorption in the music flowing from his fingers. This unguarded moment, a private passion he had not included in the carefully edited self-presentation he had offered since their arrangement began, affected Margarita more deeply than she might have expected, revealing dimensions to her husband that suggested genuine artistic sensitivity beneath his pragmatic exterior. When the piece concluded, she debated silently whether to retreat unnoticed or acknowledge her presence, the decision made for her when Gualtiero looked up and saw her standing by the partially open door. For a brief moment, something like embarrassment flickered across his features, discomfort at being observed in this private expression that contrasted with his public persona before his usual composure returned. "I apologize for the intrusion," Margarita said quietly, respecting the apparent significance of this previously undisclosed aspect of his character. "I didn't realize you played." Gualtiero closed the piano with deliberate care, his movements suggesting the same precision he brought to all activities, though something in his expression remained different from his typical business demeanor, less guarded, perhaps, or simply shifted to a different kind of attention than his usual strategic assessment. "A childhood requirement that became adult solace," he replied after a moment, the explanation more personally revealing than his typical responses. "My mother insisted on lessons despite financial limitations. Later, when circumstances improved, playing became necessary balance to business pressures." This small confession, acknowledging both humble origins and emotional needs that contradicted his public image of complete self-sufficiency, created subtle shift in their carefully maintained dynamic. As Gualtiero rose from the piano bench, Margarita made conscious decision to enter the room rather than retreat, crossing an unspoken boundary between their separate spheres within the shared household. "You play beautifully," she offered, the compliment genuine rather than strategic social flattery. "Chopin requires technical skill, but also emotional understanding that can't be acquired through practice alone." Her observation, informed by years of musical exposure through her art historical education, seemed to surprise him. Perhaps unaccustomed to being evaluated in areas outside his business expertise or having private expressions appreciated rather than analyzed for advantage. For a moment, something unguarded showed in his typically controlled features, a vulnerability quickly masked, but nonetheless momentarily visible to Margarita's increasingly perceptive observation. The incident created no dramatic transformation in their relationship, yet Margarita noticed subtle changes in subsequent interactions, occasional references to music that hadn't previously entered their conversations, Gualtiero sometimes leaving the study door open while playing in the evenings, small acknowledgements of interior life beyond practical matters that had dominated their exchanges since their arrangement began. These glimpses behind his carefully maintained facade fascinated her with increasing intensity. Professional training in analyzing visual compositions naturally extending to psychological assessment of the complex individual with whom she now shared daily existence. Like pentimenti in an old master painting, earlier compositions visible beneath the final image through careful technical examination, Gualtiero's underlying reality occasionally showed through his controlled self-presentation, revealing depths and contradictions that complicated the straightforward portrait Arezzo's whispers had painted of the feared business leader known primarily for power and intimidation rather than artistic sensitivity or personal complexity. Early summer arrived in Arezzo with characteristic Tuscan intensity. Golden sunlight extended extending into long evenings, the scent of jasmine and ripening fruit drifting through open windows, ancient stone buildings absorbing heat during day and releasing it slowly through night hours that brought limited relief from seasonal warmth. Margarita found unexpected satisfaction in the routine that had established itself over the 2 months since her extraordinary wedding day, her professional work on Gualtiero's collection providing genuine fulfillment, while their unusual domestic arrangement had settled into patterns that respected both their independence and mutual practical need. The restoration studio had become her sanctuary, the careful, detailed work of bringing damaged masterpieces back to their original beauty, offering both intellectual challenge and emotional centering amid the continuing adjustment to her new circumstances. Today, she was completing final documentation on a particularly rewarding project, a small but significant panel painting whose attribution had shifted from School of Botticelli to potential workshop piece with master's direct involvement, based on technical evidence she had uncovered during cleaning and conservation. "Your assessment appears convincing," Gualtiero observed from the studio doorway, his unexpected presence startling Margarita, who had been deeply absorbed in photographing the newly revealed details supporting her revised attribution. Unlike his usual practice of sending messages when he wished to speak with her during working hours, he had apparently come directly to the studio, a deviation from established routine that immediately caught her attention. Looking up from her camera, she noticed subtle tension in his typically composed features, nothing dramatic enough to register as distress to casual observation, but sufficient change from his normal expression to trigger concern in someone who had spent weeks studying his micro-expressions with increasing perceptiveness. Setting aside her equipment with careful deliberateness that matched his own habitual movements, Margarita gave him her full attention, waiting for explanation of this unusual interruption rather than asking directly. "We have received an invitation that presents certain complications," Gualtiero finally said, entering the studio fully and handing her an elegant cream-colored card embossed with a family crest she didn't immediately recognize. The invitation, printed on heavy stock with traditional formality, requested their presence at a significant anniversary celebration for one of Arezzo's oldest families, an event that would clearly include most of the city's social and business elite. Nothing in the wording itself suggested particular difficulty, yet Gualtiero's unusual approach indicated sensitivity beyond ordinary social obligation. "The Valentini family has complex connections to various business interests in the region," he explained, watching her reaction with characteristic intensity. "Attending represents necessary maintenance of certain relationships, yet also potentially awkward encounters given recent history." The deliberate vagueness of this explanation piqued Margarita's curiosity, her analytical mind immediately seeking the unspoken complication behind his evident concern. "Recent history, meaning our sudden marriage," she guessed, setting the invitation aside while maintaining eye contact that had become more comfortable between them over weeks of careful mutual observation. "Or something specific to this family that intersects with that development." Gualtiero's expression shifted slightly, appreciation for her direct approach to potentially sensitive matters rather than emotional avoidance that might have characterized others in similar circumstances. After brief consideration that she had learned to recognize as his habitual assessment before sharing potentially complicated information, he provided clarification with characteristic precision. "Elena Valentini was briefly involved in discussions regarding potential marriage arrangement before your unexpected availability presented more advantageous alliance. Her family had expressed interest in connecting our respective business interests through traditional union, though no formal agreement had been established. The revelation landed with unexpected impact. Not jealousy exactly, as Margarita had no illusions about romantic attachment in their arranged marriage, but rather surprise that Gualtiero had been considering conventional marriage for business advantage prior to their chance encounter. This information added new dimension to his immediate intervention in her public humiliation, suggesting her abandonment at the altar had presented convenient solution to his own developing matrimonial complications, rather than purely disinterested assistance to her family's social stand. "I see," she said after processing this revelation, professional training in maintaining composed exterior despite emotional reactions serving her well in this moment. And now we must navigate potentially awkward social interaction with a family who might view me as having somehow usurped their daughter's position, despite the arrangement never having been formalized. Gualtiero inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her quick grasp of the situation's delicacy. "Precisely. The Valentinis are too strategic to display open hostility, particularly given my current business leverage in several joint ventures. However, subtle social dynamics will require careful navigation, especially from you as the unexpected element in this equation." His assessment, delivered with typical focus on practical implications rather than emotional complications, nevertheless revealed concern for her position in the potentially uncomfortable encounter, consideration that might have been purely strategic given her role in maintaining his public image, yet somehow suggested more personal regard than mere calculation would require. Margarita considered the situation with the same analytical approach she applied to complex conservation challenges, mentally sorting through potential complications and appropriate responses based on information available. "We should attend together, presenting unified appearance while maintaining appropriate diplomatic awareness of potentially sensitive dynamics," she concluded, professional experience with navigating complex institutional politics informing her assessment despite different contexts. "I assume Elena Valentini will be present with her family." At Gualtiero's confirmatory nod, she continued developing strategy with practical focus that matched his own approach to complicated situations. "Then we acknowledge her with appropriate courtesy while avoiding extended interaction that might create awkward comparisons or trigger defensive responses. Our marriage is established fact rather than tentative arrangement, presenting it as natural development, requiring neither explanation nor apology, maintains strongest social position while minimizing potential conflict." The analysis offered without emotional entanglement or personal insecurity that might have complicated rational assessment, seemed to satisfy Gualtiero, whose expression relaxed marginally from its previous tension. "Your strategic thinking continues to impress," he observed, the comment delivered as objective assessment rather than flattery, yet carrying genuine appreciation that had become more frequent in their interactions over recent weeks. "The event is scheduled for Saturday evening. I'll have appropriate attire delivered if your current wardrobe requires supplementation." With practical matters addressed, he prepared to leave her to her interrupted work, pausing briefly at the doorway with uncharacteristic hesitation that captured Margarita's attention more effectively than any dramatic gesture might have achieved. "I should clarify that discussions with the Valentini family were exploratory rather than emotionally significant. Elena represented potentially advantageous business alliance, not personal attachment that might complicate current circumstances." The addendum, offered without evident necessity given their arrangement's practical foundation, suggested concern for her potential misinterpretation that contradicted his typically straightforward approach to their relationship. The Valentini estate, when they arrived Saturday evening, exemplified old Tuscan wealth, a Renaissance villa surrounded by perfectly maintained gardens, where generations of family history had created living museum of aristocratic tradition and carefully preserved privilege. Margarita, dressed in an elegant gown of midnight blue that complemented her coloring, while maintaining appropriate restraint for potentially complicated social engagement, felt Gualtiero's hand rest lightly at the small of her back as they entered the grand reception hall where Arezzo's elite had gathered to celebrate the family's anniversary. The gesture, which had become his habitual public indication of their supposed marital connection, conveyed both possessive claim and subtle reassurance. As they moved into social waters, potentially more challenging than previous events they had navigated together over past months. His physical proximity, maintained with careful consistency as they exchanged greetings with various business associates and social connections, created united presentation that effectively discouraged separate approaches that might have isolated Margarita for uncomfortable questioning or subtle hostility. Their strategic unity proved necessary sooner than anticipated, as their host, Vittorio Valentini, approached with his wife and daughter almost immediately upon their arrival. Social obligation requiring direct engagement rather than diplomatic distance they might have preferred for this initial interaction. Moretti, welcome, the elder Valentini greeted with practiced warmth that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. And your lovely wife, a pleasure to finally meet the woman who captured Arezzo's most determined bachelor so unexpectedly. The phrasing, while outwardly courteous, carried subtle barb that established immediate context for the encounter, making clear that their hasty marriage remained subject of speculation within circles where Gualtiero's previous marital discussions would have been known. Elena Valentini, an elegantly attractive woman perhaps 5 years older than Margarita, assessed her with the practiced evaluation of someone accustomed to social competition, her perfectly composed features revealing nothing beyond appropriate welcome, while her eyes conducted detailed inventory of potential rivals' appearance, demeanor, and evident status. Signor Valentini, you honor us with your invitation, Margarita responded, before Gualtiero could answer, her voice carrying warm confidence that effectively countered any impression of discomfort or defensive reaction to underlying tension. Your family's contributions to Arezzo's cultural heritage have long been admired, particularly your restoration of the Eastern Chapel frescoes at San Domenico. The reference to specific artistic patronage, delivered with knowledgeable appreciation rather than general flattery, momentarily disrupted the calculated dynamic Valentini had attempted to establish, forcing recognition of her professional expertise rather than merely ornamental status as Gualtiero's unexpected wife. This subtle assertion of individual identity beyond marital connection created social equilibrium that her husband immediately reinforced, his hand maintaining steady pressure at her back while he engaged Vittorio in discussion of recent business developments that shifted conversation toward shared interests rather than personal complication. Throughout the evening, Margarita navigated complex social currents with increasing confidence, her natural intelligence and artistic education providing substantial foundation for meaningful conversation, while months of observing Gualtiero's strategic approach to interpersonal dynamics had enhanced her already considerable social skills. She noted Elena Valentini watching her with careful assessment throughout the celebration, occasionally engaging mutual acquaintances in conversations that allowed observation without direct interaction. When circumstance finally created inevitable moment of direct engagement, both women simultaneously selecting refreshment from elegantly appointed buffet table somewhat removed from main gathering, Margarita maintained composed exterior despite internal awareness of potential complications this private exchange might present. Your husband seems well, Elena observed, the deliberately neutral comment nevertheless carrying unmistakable emphasis that established her previous connection to Gualtiero while assessing Margarita's reaction to this implied history. Quite well, thank you, Margarita responded with equal neutrality, neither acknowledging nor challenging the subtle assertion of prior relationship. Marriage agrees with him, perhaps to his own surprise. Mum, the response, offered with slight smile that suggested intimate knowledge without providing specific details that might seem inappropriately revealing, established confident marital connection without defensive reaction that would have indicated insecurity. Elena's perfectly shaped eyebrow lifted slightly, reassessing Margarita with more genuine attention than her previous calculated observation had demonstrated. Gualtiero has always been particular in his arrangements, she commented after brief consideration, her tone carrying complex mixture of personal knowledge and social assessment. One assumed any partner would require exceptional qualities to justify disruption of his carefully ordered existence. Your rapid elevation suggests either remarkable compatibility or strategic strategic value I had not anticipated in rumors of your background. The assessment, delivered with aristocratic directness that managed to be simultaneously complimentary and challenging, represented more honest engagement than polite social pretense might have dictated. Margarita appreciated this unexpected authenticity, responding with matching directness that respected the other woman's straightforward approach. Perhaps compatibility and strategic value need not be separate considerations, she suggested, maintaining eye contact that acknowledged the unusual conversation without discomfort or defensive withdrawal. Successful partnerships often combine practical advantages with personal alignment, particularly for someone with Gualtiero's specific position and requirements. The response neither confirmed nor denied romantic attachment, instead presenting pragmatic perspective that allowed Elena dignity of rational assessment rather than emotional competition that might have diminished both women in the interaction. Something like reluctant respect flickered in Elena's expression, recognition of intelligent response that defied easy categorization as either naive romantic or calculating opportunist. An interesting perspective, she acknowledged, selecting a small pastry with deliberate attention that provided momentary pause in their increasingly significant exchange. Arezzo wondered, when news of your extraordinary wedding spread through appropriate circles. The abandoned bride rescued by notoriously unmarriageable businessmen created inevitable speculation, romantic drama, or convenient arrangement. Your performance tonight suggests complexity beyond either simplistic narrative. The observation, offered without malice despite potential personal disappointment her family might have experienced at Gualtiero's unexpected marriage to someone outside their social circle, reflected genuine curiosity that transcended mere social competition or resentment. Before Margarita could formulate response to this surprisingly candid assessment, Gualtiero himself appeared beside them, his approach so perfectly timed that she momentarily wondered whether he had been monitoring their interaction throughout its development. "Elena, you're looking well," he greeted his former potential match with polite acknowledgement that neither emphasized nor dismissed their previous connection. "I see you've been getting acquainted with my wife." The possessive term, delivered with subtle emphasis that established clear current reality, regardless of previous possibilities, created effective conclusion to private exchange that might otherwise have developed into more complicated territory. Elena accepted this intervention with aristocratic grace, offering pleasantries that maintained social appearance while her eyes communicated more complex understanding of dynamics beneath polite surface interaction. As Gualtiero guided Margarita back toward main gathering with characteristic attention to strategic positioning within social environment, she found herself increasingly intrigued by the layers of history and connection surrounding the man she had married under such extraordinary circumstances. Their return journey from the Valentini estate passed in thoughtful silence, comfortable quiet, having developed between them over months of shared space without constant conversational requirements. As their car navigated Arezzo's ancient streets, buildings illuminated by subtle lighting that emphasized historical beauty without modern harshness, Margarita found herself studying Gualtiero's profile with new perspective, informed by evening's revelations and observations. The man she had impulsively married to escape public humiliation remained enigma in many respects despite daily proximity, his business activities conducted with careful separation from their shared domestic space, his personal history revealed only through occasional fragments that hinted at complexity beneath controlled exterior, his motivations for their arrangement still not entirely clear despite practical advantages she provided through professional skills and social presence. Yet increasingly, these mysteries intrigued rather than concerned her, her, professional training in analyzing artistic compositions naturally extending to psychological assessment of the complex individual with whom her life had become unexpectedly intertwined. "You handled Elena with remarkable skill," Gualtiero observed as they entered the palazzo, breaking the comfortable silence with rare direct compliment that acknowledged her navigation of potentially difficult social waters. Many would have responded defensively to implied challenges or attempted to establish romantic territory through inappropriate displays of affection. The assessment reflected his typical focus on strategic effectiveness rather than emotional reassurance, yet carried undertone of genuine appreciation that had become more frequent in recent interactions. Margarita considered her response carefully, recognizing opportunity to explore aspects of their relationship that typically remained unaddressed beneath practical arrangements and public performance. "Elena seems intelligent woman worth honest engagement rather than defensive posturing," she replied, removing elegant earrings as they entered the main living area where their conversations typically occurred before separating to respective private quarters. "Besides, our arrangement doesn't require romantic pretense to maintain its practical effectiveness." The deliberate acknowledgement of their marriage's arranged nature, subject typically addressed only through implicit understanding rather than direct reference, created momentary shift in atmosphere between them. Gualtiero studied her with characteristic intensity that suggested internal calculation before responding, his expression revealing little of thoughts behind careful exterior. "The arrangement has proven more effective than initially anticipated," he finally observed, removing his formal jacket with precise movements that matched his typical controlled behavior. "Your contributions extend beyond original parameters in both professional and social spheres." Nice. The acknowledgement, while phrased in typically practical terms, nevertheless represented significant recognition of value she had brought to his carefully ordered existence, beyond specific benefits outlined in their original discussion at the cathedral months earlier. "I found unexpected satisfaction as well," Margarita admitted, honesty that had characterized their relationship from beginning extending to this assessment of their unusual partnership. "Professional opportunity your collection provides offers genuine fulfillment, while social navigation presents interesting challenges different from academic environment where I previously operated. The evaluation, focused on practical benefits rather than emotional connection, maintained established parameters of their relationship while acknowledging mutual advantage beyond mere convenient arrangement." Something in Gualtiero's expression shifted slightly, subtle relaxation perhaps, or recognition of shared perspective that aligned with his own experience of their partnership. Before either could pursue this momentary connection further, however, his phone signaled message requiring attention, effectively concluding personal exchange that had briefly transcended their typical practical interaction. As July's heat settled over Arezzo, the palazzo's ancient walls breathed out the day's warmth through long, restless nights. Despite modern air conditioning, Gualtiero preferred open windows and natural air, the same quiet preference Margarita shared. After 4 months together, their arrangement had grown from convenience into genuine companionship. What began as separate routines and polite distance now carried traces of familiarity, mutual respect, and something unspoken that neither hurried nor denied. Margarita had restored 6 of his paintings, each revealing unexpected depth in the man the city saw only as a calculating boss. Their talks about brushwork and history drifted into philosophy and memory until work hours blurred with curiosity. Publicly, they performed marriage so convincingly that gossip had faded. Privately, their harmony felt accidental yet undeniable. Still, questions lingered. Why had Gualtiero truly married her that day? His gesture had rescued her reputation, but his motives remained veiled. One stifling July night, unable to sleep, Margarita climbed to the rooftop terrace. The skyline shimmered under a half-moon when Gualtiero appeared, dressed simply, whiskey in hand. "The light tonight reveals what daylight hides," he said. She smiled, like pentimenti, old sketches showing through new paint. He joined her at the balustrade, the city glowing below them, silence settling easily between two people who no longer needed pretenses. Her question broke it softly. Why did you really propose our arrangement? He paused, gaze fixed on the horizon. Because you faced humiliation with dignity, he admitted. Strength shown in vulnerability is rare where I come from. His honesty stripped away the distance between them. Then we recognized something in each other, she said. That's why it worked. He nodded. Convenience may start a structure, but compatibility gives it life. When he offered her the glass, their fingers brushed, simple, deliberate, charged with awareness. Thank you, she murmured, not just for helping me, but for respecting me. He met her eyes. Respect is the least one should offer. Under the pale light, they stood close. No vows or declarations, only shared understanding. His hand reached for hers, asking, not demanding. She answered with quiet certainty. The half-moon drifted above them, witnessing the moment their arrangement became something real, fleeting, fragile, and unforgettable.